Welcome to today's webinar. General Dynamics Information Technology initiated a research study with Market Connections to determine agency zero trust maturity levels, investment priorities, and challenges in where agencies are in their zero trust journeys and plan to be by the Cyber Executive Order deadline. I'm Elizabeth Lowry, Director of Research Services at Market Connections. We're pleased to share those results with you today and discuss what they mean. To help us with this, we have three cyber expert panelists with us. Our cyber experts joining us today to discuss the study include Dr. Matthew McFadden, Vice President for Cyber at GDIT. Dr. McFadden spearheads cyber strategy for GDIT's federal, civilian, defense and intelligence, and homeland security divisions, and develops advanced cyber capabilities and offerings to address agency missions. He represents a cyber workforce of more than 3,000 plus professionals, 30 plus cyber alliances, and programs supporting some of the largest unique cyber missions in the federal sector. Dr. John Salen, Director of Cyber Solutions Defense at GDIT. Dr. Salen leads GDIT's strategic planning, client engagement, and capability development for enterprise cyber solutions and zero trust architectures supporting defense agencies. And Leo Taddeo, Chief Information Security Officer and President at Appgate Federal. Mr. Taddeo oversees Appgate's federal government business, working closely with sales and technical leadership to define and deliver zero trust solutions to meet the needs of the company's public sector customers. He also serves as Appgate's CISO, directing global security operations, crisis management, and business continuity processes. To begin the discussion, I'll turn it over to Dr. McFadden.
Thanks. So GDIT is excited to present the results of this study today with Appgate on the Agency Guide to Zero Trust Implementation. We conducted this study to better understand how agencies are doing on developing and implementing zero trust strategies, the benefits and challenges, and understanding the impact to their missions. So to cover this webinar today, we are going to take a look at the introduction. We're going to talk about the research objectives and methodology. We're going to talk about the research findings, provide some recommendations and next steps, and lastly, follow with questions and answers. All right, so to start out with our introduction. I'm excited to present this study as GDIT has been very involved with implementing zero trust across government, even prior to the executive order. We know this has been a huge transformation. With the executive order, it basically laid the framework to drive towards zero trust. The White House released the OMB M2209 to lay some goalposts to meet to help drive towards zero trust. So I have to say that this research has never been more timely in really understanding the progress towards implementation. I think agencies really understand that this is a multi-year journey. There's a lot of challenges to drive it forward, but really this report is here to really help agencies accelerate their adoption of zero trust, to better understand how they establish strategy and governance, identifying the right technologies to implement, how do they address legacy infrastructure, and really demonstrate the value of zero trust to the agency, the stakeholders, and the entire enterprise. So as part of this research objectives and methodology, GDIT contracted Market Connections to help implement this study. We surveyed a broad base of agencies and roles to get a well-rounded assessment of how agencies are progressing in their adoption of zero trust. As part of this, we surveyed 60% federal civilian agencies and 40% defense agencies. As part of their roles, we have a 50-50 split between IT decision makers and influencers and line of business program managers. And all the respondents were required to be working in the federal government and as part of driving zero trust within their agency. All right, so let's get into the research findings. So from here, we have some very key takeaways that we found from interviewing those 300 IT and program managers across federal, civilian, and defense agencies. And as I stated, they are making very significant progress. So the first thing is, zero trust. We found that respondents believe that the top benefit of a zero trust approach is that the right users have to have the right access to the right resources at the right time. The second key point is optimal maturity is still a ways off. Most said that they're currently at a traditional or advanced maturity level for each of the pillars, while few have reached the optimal level at this time. So there's still progress to be made. Legacy infrastructure is also hard to replace. So, the study found that existing legacy infrastructures must be rebuilt or replaced to really drive forward a zero trust, and requires digital transformation, and sees technologies such as cloud as a top priority to help achieve that. Next, collaboration between mission and IT teams are very important. And respondents found that they were having trouble identifying what technologies they need, and are concerned with having the right expertise and resources to help drive forward zero trust. Next, agencies are feeling confident in their approach, and they understand that they have the right strategies in place to actively implement zero trust, and they have a high confidence in their ability to defend against cyber threats. And then lastly, as the zero trust knowledge is growing, only 7% of respondents consider themselves experts in zero trust, but most have some knowledge. Agencies are working to upskill their teams as the need to adopt more robust cyber capabilities grow. So next, let's dive into the study.
This slide represents the responses to the questions regarding the group's confidence in their security capabilities and their use of the zero trust principles. On the left-hand side, we see that 92% of respondents are somewhat or very confident in their security capabilities, and that correlates nicely with the earlier data that show there is still some way to go. On the right-hand side of the slide, we see that up to 76% of the respondents are in either active use of a zero trust strategy or in the planning phase of a zero trust strategy, and that correlates closely with earlier data that show the knowledge of zero trust principles is growing. So currently, most agencies are following what appear to be more traditional security approaches. These traditional security approaches are sometimes overlapping with the zero trust approach, but they are in many ways different. The traditional approach to security involved creating a castle and moat type of defense strategy, which is often taken advantage of by our adversaries. And the zero trust approach takes a totally different strategy in that it doesn't create trust within a perimeter. It uses zero trust in that all requests for access to an asset are verified before a connection is allowed, which eliminates really the perimeter approach to security. So I think there's a lot to be gained from reading into this data. And primarily it's that the respondents are embracing zero trust in both their level of confidence and their knowledge of the zero trust approach.
All right, next, John, can you cover down on zero trust maturity guidance?
Well, certainly. So this particular slide represents a series of questions associated with how agencies are following guidance to implement their zero trust strategy. And we see actually two questions here represented. The first is, which is the most helpful guidance for implementing zero trust? And what we see here is more or less an even split among the federal civilian agencies and the defense agencies in terms of which document they felt was most helpful in implementing their strategy. Not terribly surprised to find this split because of the nature of the documentation. It makes perfect sense that defense respondents would find the Defense Department's zero trust reference architecture the most helpful in implementing their zero trust strategy, because that is the reference architecture they're marching toward. And same with the federal civilian, that the majority really are focusing either on the OMB memo or the NIST guidance. Now, the one thing we found interesting was this follow-on question regarding whether they were following CISA's zero trust maturity model. And only about half of respondents said that they were. Another quarter of respondents weren't sure. And at first we found this surprising, but then at second glance, not that surprising, because the maturity model is still somewhat pre-decisional. It was an early release, and CISA hasn't gotten response back from the agencies to really identify how they can tailor that document. This really is in line with how CISA operates. They put something out there as a first iteration, get feedback, and tailor their maturity model. So this is actually in keeping with how CISA operates in general. So while it was at first surprising, when we started thinking about it, not so much. It's absolutely on track with what we see. Agencies are using it and will be using it more in the future as future releases come through to help these agencies implement their zero trust maturity. So why are we implementing zero trust in the first place? One of the benefits of moving to a zero trust model. So this question provided some insight that personally I'm very pleased to see, because it focused on the mission. You'll see that the top benefit cited here is providing the right users with the right access to services and data at the right time. And this was across the board, regardless of service of the agency, or regardless of whether it was a line of business manager or an IT decision maker. So the good news story here is that people understand that the primary value of zero trust is enabling the mission. Yes, there are security elements to zero trust. This is a security model. But the primary benefit is moving away from that castle and moat security perimeter approach that Leo had mentioned previously, and moving toward a more transactional model that enables dynamic access of the right level of services and data to the operators when and where they need them, and nothing else. Some follow-on benefits that we saw, closely following this top lead, is that it reduces the risk of data breach and reduces the cyber attack surface. And again, both of these are not surprising to see. What we found, or what I found interesting, is that the line of business managers really covered down heavily on the idea that the zero trust is going to help reduce the risk of a data breach. Again, the line of business managers, those who are responsible for executing the mission, are also most closely aligned with the mission value of the data. So it follows that they would be most concerned about the risk of a data breach. So I really do see these responses as a good news story that the agencies are focusing on the right things and really do understand the core value statement of zero trust. It's not just a buzzword, and it's not a thing. Zero trust is a way of protecting our data and enabling the mission in such a way that we become more effective, more efficient, and more secure as the adversarial threat evolves over time. So this is really a good news story that we understand it, we get it. But there are some challenges with implementing zero trust. You know, more than half state that of respondents stated that the biggest challenge to implementing zero trust is all of the existing legacy infrastructure that's out there that needs to be built and replaced. You know, for these systems, a lot of times moving to a zero trust model means that they're going to have to make some hard decisions about, do I replace or rebuild these legacy systems? You know, some systems can't simply be refactored or rehosted. We may have to replace and retire these legacy systems, or re-architect them from scratch and start over, because they're generally based on an implicit trust model. The good news here is that zero trust provides a dynamic access layer and a dynamic perimeter that can be drawn not only at the transactional level, but can be drawn around these legacy systems, right? We can implement zero trust in an iterative fashion in such a way that we're building essentially kind of bubble wrap around some of these legacy systems that are so hard to get to. So while they are challenging, zero trust provides us the flexibility to work around that scenario and really mitigate the challenges here. Some of the other concerns that people found particularly challenging was really just determining what set of technologies we need and having the staff and expertise to implement zero trust. This is a new way of thinking. It's a new way of thinking about security, and it will require some upskilling, some retraining of staff in order to maintain that expertise in-house, to develop, implement, and ultimately maintain these solutions. So if we look at the differences in the challenges that were cited to implementing zero trust, we found that the defense respondents seem to be more concerned with the cost of the investment necessary to implement zero trust and the internal resources, the staff, in order to execute and manage and maintain a zero trust solution. Again, this doesn't surprise us at all. Defense systems have a tendency to have several of these legacy and exotic systems. So if we look at the entirety of the defense enterprise and say, hey, make that all zero trust, well, that is going to take some time because some of these systems are going to be more difficult than others to migrate to a zero trust solution. So with that, we really focus on the value of implementing an iterative approach, making progress towards zero trust, and remembering that zero trust isn't a thing. It's not a package of software or a box that you buy and throw into your system. It's an approach and a methodology for managing your data, managing your services. We also saw that the IT delivery managers and influencers seem to be most concerned with determining what set of technologies we need to implement zero trust. And when you look at the field of technology providers that are out there saying that we can solve all of your woes with our zero trust solution, not surprising. There is a large field out there. And that's where GDIT really, we excel in identifying where those mission relevant technology components are that are appropriate for each individual agency and mission, and then tailor those solutions to help those IT influencers and decision makers kind of navigate those complex waters.
All right, so to deep dive in the current stage of maturity. So for each of the 5 zero trust pillars as part of CISA zero trust maturity model, most reported that they are currently at a traditional or an advanced maturity level, and few have reached the optimal level at this time. Many agencies understand that zero trust is a journey, and agencies recognize the need to really understand the baseline of maturity to make measurable progress over time. As we've seen from the research, many are focused on meeting those initial OMB actions, but over time, they still need to mature across the various pillars. From the data, we see that increasing focus areas around identity and data at the advanced level. At an aggregate level, respondents consider agencies most mature in these areas. And I think that's because, if you take a look at the first pillar, right, zero trust is somewhat built on the foundation of identity. And the maturity of identity is largely the result of many existing requirements that have been out there for a while around federal identity and credential access management, or ICAM. That has been somewhat well established. Additionally, a lot of the tenets, one of the key tenets of zero trust is that you have to take a risk-based approach to allowing access to the data. So it's not expected that agencies feel that they are somewhat more mature in this pillar. I think as agencies move forward, maturity requires a more extensive adoption of some core technologies and capabilities. So for example, enterprise endpoint detection and response, or microsegmentation, or zero trust network access. Those are some core capabilities that will better help maturity in key pillars. So as agencies really begin to adopt zero trust, baseline their environment, assess where they really need to make those investments, we'll see those new technologies being implemented, and hence we'll see an increase in maturity at those advanced and optimal levels. So to talk a little bit about the timeline to meeting those executive order requirements. So about 2/3 report that they will meet all zero trust security requirements early or on time. I think this is really, really great news. 63% of respondents state that their agencies will meet these requirements by the end of 24. So as I mentioned before, right, as part of the OMB initial actions, that really set the goalpost. It's good to report that most respondents feel that they're going to meet those goals. 31% of respondents say that their agencies will miss the deadline for some or most of the challenges. And that could be reflected for a variety of reasons. But I think many agencies understand that zero trust is a multi-year journey. They're moving on the path to maturity. But many of those challenges could be, lack of expertise, trouble identifying the right technologies, the different cost investments that they have to make, as well as, for a very long time, we've relied on those legacy security approaches. And this is very much a culture shift in changing the way that we approach cybersecurity in our organization. So, I think largely, the focus really is, introducing zero trust gradually, identifying the areas that really need the most attention, and beginning to make measurable progress towards key outcomes that deliver those quick wins. And I think agencies will really have opportunities to budget, for other investments that they can't necessarily source from existing funding. And that should be included as part of their strategy. So, once again, as they drive towards those implementation plans and really assessing their environments, I think they'll begin to really prioritize what they need to do to help drive forward those timelines. All right, over to Leo to talk about visibility and analytics.
Achieving visibility and analytics capability by fiscal year 2024. This is an important slide because it really highlights a key differentiator for the zero trust approach, and that is to gain visibility and perform analytics on that visibility in order to make access decisions. This is a departure from the traditional approach, of course, where a user once granted access had persistent access regardless of a change in context or a change in the threat environment. And I think this is a significant improvement, and asking this question is a great data point for us to look at. If you take a look at the first response at 62%, we're seeing that 6 out of 10 of the respondents are confident that they will be able to continuously run device posture assessments by 2024. And that again comports with earlier data in the survey in the investment in EDR and other device protection technologies. It also represents some of the less complex security controls that agencies are pursuing, given that deploying EDR is relatively easier than some of the other potential responses that we saw. For example, integrating analysis across multiple sensors being highly complex is something that our respondents are less confident that they will achieve by 2024. So it's an important data point for industry leaders and IT leaders in these agencies to, again, seek out the expertise necessary to gain the optimal status, or at least make progress towards the optimal status in some of the more effective zero trust principles, or at least seek out the kind of guidance that will inform your purchase decisions so that you can get out of the easier tasks like EDR protection and into the more advanced analytics and visibility, and take advantage of the data that's in your system.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about automation and orchestration capabilities by FY24. So of the respondents, over half believe that they'll be able to adapt to ongoing environmental changes for security and performance optimization for applications by the end of FY24. Automation orchestration is a very important pillar in Zero Trust, as it works across all of the pillars. And one of the important things that we know is that, just with the ever-increasing threats, data, and scalability, automation is a really key component for driving forward Zero Trust, especially when it comes to response in making, real-time risk decisions to drive forward the effective implementation of Zero Trust. So, I think as we move forward, that, agencies are working towards this, but in order to do this effectively, they understand that, they need to focus on, the 5 core pillars to most effectively do this. And once again, this may require, establishing the right tools and technologies in some areas to most effectively do this. It also works very closely with visibility and orchestration to ensure that, we can effectively automate and orchestrate our Zero Trust approach. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk governance.
Thanks. And as Matt had mentioned, automation and orchestration is a vital aspect of any Zero Trust architecture. And that extends over into this next question, where we found that, 2/3 of respondents really believe their agencies are going to be able to use automation to enhance the discovery of their networks, their devices, their services, and really understand, kind of get their hands around the dynamic authorization and remediation process for their environment. The first step is to really understand what that environment is and how the operators are using and accessing those services and data. And automation is going to help to understand what the state is of the enterprise environment. And again, our respondents get it. The other thing that I found really encouraging here is that over half of respondents feel that they're going to be able to update application policies and dynamic enforcement by the end of FY24. And this is probably one of the more challenging aspects of zero trust because, as Matt had mentioned previously, this is a fundamental shift in culture. You know, previously we look at role-based access and say, because I am who I am and what position I am in the organization, I then have access to these services and data. Breaking out of that role, breaking out of that mode and moving into a, well, who are you? How are you trying to access that data? When are you trying to access that data? From where? For what purpose? At what time of day? All of a sudden really looks at how we use data and systems and services in a different way. So I'm encouraged that well over half of respondents feel that they're going to be able to get there with that kind of a culture shift. This is great. So now let's talk about the investment priorities that our respondents identified as critical. Leo?
Thank you. Yeah, so of course, much of the strategy of zero trust turns on where funding is applied. And the respondents on this slide indicated that the majority of their investments were in very traditional security controls like device protection. So we don't see any big surprises in the data represented here. But we did see in earlier slides that the principal benefits, according to the respondents, the principal benefits of the zero trust approach to security are user experience and protecting against data breaches. However, it's not exactly represented in their investment priorities because many of the more advanced zero trust capabilities are lower priorities, such as microsegmentation and artificial intelligence. And that may be because there is an experience gap also represented in the data in the survey, where investments are made where expertise is available and can apply the technology to ensure effective security value. And this is where I think enterprises like GDIT really can add to the zero trust journey, because they can close that gap in terms of the expertise in applying sort of security controls like artificial intelligence. These are complex challenges that require integration across multiple systems, understanding business processes, and it's not something that the government has the ability to either train up to or even hire that type of expertise. And it really is a bespoke service that only those who understand the complexity of a government enterprise and the funding requirements and the deployment requirements and the mission requirements. So I think what we can read from this slide is that, as no surprise, device protection, which are usually agents that are easy to deploy on an endpoint, are what our respondents are spending the most money on, but where they probably should be focusing additional funding is in some of these more advanced capabilities like artificial intelligence and microsegmentation. And if they need assistance, there are companies like GDIT, and we're proud to be partners with GDIT in these efforts. So this slide, I think, teaches us that there should be better funding applied to some of the more advanced zero trust capabilities that are in the maturity model.
Based upon the results, we came up with 6 core takeaways to help drive zero trust within various agencies. So John, over to you to start.
Thanks. As we mentioned before, one of the key benefits, the top benefit identified of zero trust, is making sure that the right users have the right access to the right services and data at the right time. You know, zero trust is a shift in focus away from compliance and toward mission execution. If you leave this webcast with nothing else, remember that cyber is more than compliance. Cyber is a mission enabler. And as we implement our zero trust strategies, agencies will become more compliant. The compliance will follow. But what they need to do is they need to focus on how do we manage the data and services in a way to securely and effectively execute the mission. The compliance will follow. The next takeaway is to focus on executable outcomes that help you move down the road. As we mentioned, this is a journey. Zero trust is not necessarily an endpoint. It's not necessarily a thing, right? It is a way of changing how we manage our data and services and take more of a mission focus toward it. So the best advice we can give and kind of as a call to action is identify some executable chunks that you can do today to accelerate value to the organization and make progress toward an overall zero trust architectural approach, understanding that it may require an iterative approach, particularly for some of these legacy systems. And then finally, understand what the guidance says and how it applies specifically to the agency's mission. You know, I can't foot stomp enough that cybersecurity through the lens of zero trust is a mission enhancer, a mission enabler. Compliance is not enough, and therefore a purely IT-centric approach or a compliance-driven approach towards security is not sufficient to help the agencies get to where they need to go. It's going to require a strong partnership between the line of business managers, those who are responsible for executing the mission, and the enterprise IT team who have to provide the services and data in a mission-capable way.
Right. So next, I think most importantly, agencies have to start where they are today. While it's best to build zero trust from the ground up, it isn't always possible. We really have to make our investments, based upon the mission and really optimize our investment dollars where we're providing, we're going to have the greatest progress and really drive towards that mission outcome. As I mentioned earlier, right, it's about, making measurable progress over time. So, we have to really identify where the agencies have already made investments and really drive to extend those. The other piece is, maybe start with a pilot and help drive those legacy systems to a new environment, especially when budgets are tight. Next, after assessing the above steps, really prioritize those investments and technologies. So, focus on transitioning from a cost-based accounting project model to more of a value-driven approach where delivering value early through quick win projects, such as focusing on a high-value system or a very large zero trust technology gap where you could maybe source within current agency funding. Demonstrating this value early and aligning to future IT investments helps drive those mission outcomes towards zero trust. And then lastly, ask for help. There are a lot of government agencies out there, such as CISA and DISA, and various zero trust working groups to help support you on your journey. The other piece is, agencies should partner very closely with third parties and industry to really help address those cyber challenges and implement those successful zero trust strategies. One of the reasons why GDIT launched our Zero Trust Accelerator to help drive forward those lessons learned, those industry best practices, and really drive forward those emerging capabilities to close the zero trust gap. So with that, we are going to move over to the question and answer portion of the presentation.
We have received a number of questions during today's webinar. Let's take a few to begin. Dr. Salen, how should agencies measure success on all of the work being done? Is it the lack of something happening? When will agencies start to see a return on their investments?
I'm really glad this question got asked because zero trust, as we talked about, is more than just compliance. It's all about implementing tools that help support the mission and provide the right services and data at the right time to effect that mission. And the whole goal of Zero Trust is to reduce the impact of any cyber incident. But demonstrating the ROI of Zero Trust is hard enough for commercial organizations, for commercial industry. And we have the benefit of the profit motive that we can rely on. We can look at it in those terms. But for government agencies, it's even more difficult to identify what the return on investment is. So my recommendation would be focus on the metrics that we can clearly tie towards Zero Trust. Classic enterprise IT metrics, including typical security metrics, including enabling the mission, including end-to-end performance, user experience. But then also remember that we need to partner with the line of business, with those who own the mission execution requirement, and talk to them and find out how we can establish value metrics that make sense and drive toward mission effectiveness, and roll that into our overall calculation of ROI. And that can really help. Also, we can look at specific tactics that are security related. Zero Trust provides that dynamic access control and policy enforcement, which is an interesting capability when you add to it the notion of honeypots and honey nets. As we move into more deceptive cyber operations, we can actually use the flexibility of a Zero Trust architecture to drive suspected adversarial activity into a honey net and observe that activity and learn from it to help inform the overall Zero Trust architecture and help us become even more cyber resilient. So there's that benefit as well.
Dr. McFadden, you mentioned that AI wasn't as high of a priority for agencies as others. How will AI and cyber help deliver Zero Trust for agencies?
Sure. So I think AI will be an important component. I look at AI as somewhat of an enabler / a force multiplier of how we can adopt Zero Trust better. So whether it is detecting new threats or beginning to better automate how we provide mitigations. There's this whole concept around autonomous cyber where if you look at the automation and orchestration and the visibility and analytics pillar, they could be very closely supported by AI, where we're basically trying to drive towards near real-time response. So, we know that threats are going to ever increase. There's more data, more environments, and at some point, humans can't necessarily operate at machine speed, right? So leveraging AI can help us detect those unknown threats, unknown behaviors, and continually and automatically make action in real time. And that whole idea is, AI will help us leverage towards a more autonomous cyber posture, which is, very much a core part of Zero Trust.
Dr. Salen, how does preparing for Zero Trust help agencies on a road to a continuous ATO, and what is the benefit of that?
Continuous ATO seems to be on everybody's mind. Anywhere I talk, any conferences or any client engagements I work in, people want to know, how do we get closer to a CATO type environment? And this is where we're really proud to have one of our technology providers here sponsoring this study, Appgate, because the ability for a Zero Trust architecture to provide context-based control of Zero Trust and access control and dynamic allocation of resources is kind of a critical step toward getting us toward that continuous ATO process. Because as we make changes to our environment, we are able to provide dynamic access control to those changes based on a variety of attributes and telemetry that we're seeing. And our technology partners help us effect those concepts. So as we automate those security control functions, all of that helps us get directly to the type of continuous monitoring that really is necessary to establish and maintain that CATO process. And this makes us overall more resilient as our adversaries are continuously evolving and becoming more sophisticated. So the dynamism that is provided by some of our technology partners, particularly in the realms of zero trust network access, really help us get there.
Mr. Taddeo, one of the biggest challenges agencies indicated they're facing was with legacy technology. What specific legacy technologies are obstacles to zero trust maturity?
Well, I think the legacy technology that is most commonly used for remote access, secure remote access, being the VPN, is a technology that has outlived its usefulness in relation to the type of workforce we have today and the way we deliver IT services to the workforce to ensure that they are productive. If you remember, VPNs were developed at a time when most of an enterprise's resources were on premises, and we needed a way for a remote employee to emulate the conditions of the employee being on premises and on the enterprise's network. Well, that has shown to have both security flaws and zero trust principle limitations, meaning the VPN cannot connect to multiple assets at the same time. The VPN is often routed through a concentrator that has vulnerabilities of its own, and the VPN is often not the optimal user experience. And when you look at the way our enterprises today have distributed IT environments, meaning some of their resources are on-prem and some of them are in the cloud, and some of them are some type of hybrid, potentially co-located services. Accessing those using VPNs are cumbersome for the user and not always directly responsive to the access policies for each of those environments. So VPN being at the top of my list of legacy technologies that are an obstacle to advanced zero trust principle deployment. The second would be something like network access control, or NAC. Again, NAC being a tool developed when there were perimeter-based strategies and most of the enterprise's resources were on premises and the network was controlled primarily and owned by the enterprise. That is not the model that we have today, with resources, again, distributed across multiple infrastructure options, including co-location and cloud and on-prem. And so NAC, even when it was a modern technology, was difficult to deploy effectively. And today, not only is it difficult to deploy, but it has continuing decreased value in a zero trust environment. So enterprises that are still using these technologies are faced with difficult choices in transitioning to more modern options and more flexible options, but technologies are out there, and the expertise to deploy them is out there. And I think it is part of the journey to deprecate these technologies and match better with the modern workforce and the modern environments that the workforce is given access to.
Dr. Salen, some agencies are saying they might not meet the 2024 deadline. What should they be focusing on, even as they're potentially going to miss this deadline?
You know, that's a great question, and frankly, one of the key takeaways that we talked about at the end of the presentation directly speaks to this. You know, focus on what we can execute today. Break out your roadmap into executable chunks. And whenever I have this conversation with agencies, I always say focus on what's causing you pain first. Second, what can you control? And third, what security controls and policies can you inherit from either parent or partner organizations? And if you prioritize your pain points based on what you can control and what you either can't and have to inherit or could potentially inherit, it really helps you prioritize your investments. And the good news here is that there are shared services available for agencies to leverage, even if it's in the short term, to get them closer to their own infrastructure type environment that looks more like a zero trust environment. Understand that those shared services are available from organizations like CISA and others that they could use in the interim. And they might realize that that more than satisfies their needs to affect the mission in the long term anyway. So I think this is a call to action to really prioritize those investments and then look around to see what you can inherit from other organizations.
Dr. McFadden, what is GDIT's role in supporting agencies developing and implementing zero trust?
Sure. So I think most importantly, to tie it to the results, we are helping with that considerable progress, towards driving towards zero trust. So, with that, we have quite a few engagements supporting, federal civilian defense agencies across the board, supporting every pillar from strategy to governance. For example, GDIT is working with the DoD on its ICAM solution, helping to connect the joint force, supporting their identity pillar. We're working many of the actionable roadmaps, supporting assessments, helping them to establish governance. And that's why we established our Zero Trust Accelerator. As we wanted agencies to accelerate their adoption of zero trust as quickly as possible, while knowing we have to meet the cyber EO and OMB 2209 requirements. So our accelerator is helping to drive strategies, playbooks, enablement kits that agencies can use to help quicken the adoption. With that, we have a very large partner ecosystem where we're trying to bring the best in breed capabilities in zero trust to the mission, hence why Appgate is on this call today. We're actively working with many different agencies to help tailor whatever solution they need to once again meet agencies where they are with adopting zero trust. As part of our GDIT Zero Trust Emerge Lab, we're working with our partners, such as Appgate, to demonstrate solutions that really help with that strategy. And we even have managed security offerings that we can drive forward to help deliver more integrated security information event management, or helping with displaying the most prioritized cyber events. Ultimately, we are trying to really drive forward zero trust and helping agencies through being that trusted partner. All right, so with that, thanks for joining our agency guide to zero trust implementation. I hope you found the results very interesting, and I hope you'll use them to help drive zero trust within your respective agencies. As a note, please download the full report to see the in-depth analysis at gdit.com/cyber. We thank you all for being here. Special thanks to Appgate, our various partner agencies, and all the folks for joining and asking questions. Once again, if you need help, feel free to reach out. Thank you.